So with your applause, please welcome Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg.
Thank you so much, Heather, and it's great to be back in Munich, and great to be here together with Mette, Sauli, and Maia, and I look forward to our conversation in just a few moments. Russia's war against Ukraine grinds on. We may be shocked by its brutality, but we should not be surprised. This is part of a pattern of Russian aggression for several years, and NATO allies shared precise intelligence about Moscow's plans for an invasion long in advance. Over many months, we made every effort to engage Russia in diplomacy. And just days before, on this very stage in Munich, I called on President Putin to step back from the brink. But despite our calls for peace, he chose to attack. We can already draw some important lessons from the war. First, we must sustain and step up our support to Ukraine. Putin is not planning for peace. He is planning for more war, new offensives. And there are no indications he has changed his ambitions. He is mobilizing hundreds of thousands of troops, increasingly putting the Russian economy on a war footing, and reaching out to other authoritarian regimes such as Iran and North Korea to get more weapons. So we must give Ukraine what they need to win and prevail as a sovereign, independent nation in Europe. Some worry that our support to Ukraine risks triggering escalation. Let me be clear. There are no risk-free options. But the biggest risk of all is if Putin wins. If Putin wins in Ukraine, the message to him and other authoritarian leaders will be that they can use force to get what they want. This will make the world more dangerous and us more vulnerable. So supporting Ukraine is not only the morally right thing to do, it is also in our own security interest. The second lesson is that we need to continue to strengthen our deterrence and defense. Wars are unpredictable, and we do not know when or how this one will end. But I do know this: even if the war ends tomorrow, our security environment has changed for the long term. There is no going back. Kremlin wants a different Europe, one where Russia controls neighbors. We also know that Beijing is watching closely to see the price Russia pays or the reward it receives for its aggression. What is happening in Europe today could happen in Asia tomorrow. So the war in Ukraine demonstrates that security is not regional, it is global. In this new and more contested world, we can no longer afford to treat defense as optional. It is a necessity. Yes, spending more on defense means less money for other important tasks. But nothing is more important than our security, to preserve peace. The third lesson is that we need to strengthen the resilience of our societies. Military forces are necessary to protect our security, but they are not sufficient. We must also secure our cyberspace, our supply chains, and our infrastructure. The war in Ukraine has made clear the danger of over-reliance on authoritarian regimes. Not so long ago, many argued that importing Russian gas was purely an economic issue. It is not. It is a political issue. It is about our security. Because Europe's dependency on Russian gas made us vulnerable. So we should not make the same mistakes with China and other authoritarian regimes. We must not become too dependent on products and raw materials we import, avoid exporting key technologies that could be used against us, and protect our critical infrastructure at home. Of course, we should continue to trade and engage economically with China, but our economies and our economic interests cannot outweigh our security interests. So it's only right that we protect ourselves. But in doing so, we must remember that trade among friends and allies makes us stronger and more resilient. We must not create new barriers between free and open economies. The most important lesson from the war in Ukraine is that North America and Europe must stand together. In a more dangerous world, we need our transatlantic alliance more than ever. Without NATO, there is no security in Europe. So this is not the time to look beyond the alliance. This is the time to strengthen and enlarge our alliance, to promote peace, protect our shared security, and defend a global system based on our values and international law. Thank you, and then I look forward to our conversation.
Secretary General Stoltenberg, thank you. And let me please welcome our panelists to the platform. And while they're walking up, Secretary General, if I may start with you. Okay, we'll do the handshake first here. Thank you, welcome. Secretary General, while everyone's getting seated, if I may just ask you the first question. And I want to pull on the unthinkable, but if Putin wins, as you suggested that, NATO would have to incredibly strengthen the eastern flank, its NATO spending. 2% would be the absolute floor. How do we as an alliance prepare for the unthinkable, and what does that alliance look like for the next 10, 15, 20 years?
So first of all, President Putin must not win this war, and that's why NATO allies and partners all around the world has mobilized so much support to Ukraine. Because it will be a tragedy for the Ukrainians, but it will also be extremely dangerous for us. Because then the message is that when he uses force, then he gets what he wants. And we need to understand this is not only a European challenge, this is a global challenge. I recently visited South Korea and Japan, two close partners of NATO. And they see the link between what's going on in Europe and what's going on and may happen in Asia. So Beijing is watching closely the outcome of the war in Ukraine. And of course, if Putin wins in Ukraine, it will impact the decisions and the calculations that Beijing is doing in their part of the world. So this is about our global security. This is not about regional security. NATO has already adapted. The war didn't start in February last year. It started in 2014. And since 2014, we have implemented the biggest reinforcement of our collective defense with more troops, higher readiness, presence in the eastern part of the alliance, new defense plans, and also increased defense spending. And when we meet in Vilnius this year, I'm absolutely certain that we will reconfirm that message, both the stronger partnership with our partners in the Asia-Pacific, support for Ukraine, but also how to strengthen our deterrence and defense.
Secretary General, I want one more question to you, and then I want to bring our other panelists into the conversation. So in 5 months, the allies will gather in Vilnius, an incredibly important summit. At the end of that summit, what does success look like for you and for the alliance?
Well, the success is about demonstrating the unwavering support for Ukraine, and I'm absolutely confident that that will be the case in Vilnius. It's about reiterating our commitment to strengthen our deterrence and defense, and it's about building the partnership with our Asia-Pacific partners, because security is not regional, security is global. But then there is one other thing that will mark success, and that is that we will enlarge the alliance. I really work hard and really hope that by the Vilnius summit we will have finalized the accession process, and we have Finland and Sweden as the two new members of our alliance.
Secretary General, that's the perfect segue to opening our conversation with President Niinistö. But before I get to the accession question, President Niinistö, other than former Chancellor Merkel, you probably have had the most conversations with Vladimir Putin. And it was important to keep that dialogue. I would imagine your last conversation was when you shared with him that Finland was applying for NATO membership. But I want to ask you, because your knowledge of Vladimir Putin and you've observed his leadership over the last 12 months, help us understand where you think this regime is going. It's been under enormous stress, and you have some of the sharpest analytical thinking about Russia, and then I'm going to ask you that accession question, but I want to start there first.
Okay, thank you. I have heard said that the Russian regime is the same in the future, if not even more of the same, and we know what the same is here. So we haven't seen any major changes, except that maybe the leadership is more concentrated on Putin, and the amount of elite people around him is maybe reducing a bit. Those more from the business side are maybe far further away at the moment. We have to keep in mind that military is number one in Russian society, in their economy, in their industry, whatever. And I guess that they are measuring this situation all the time, the Ukrainian war, by their military success. And that's the only figure that really that they really care about. And that also explains that what is going on, and I'm afraid will continue. So something like this.
More of the same, greater intensity, which moves us to the urgency of Finland and Sweden formally joining the alliance. So, Secretary General, I may be bringing you into this conversation as well, because I want to make sure I understand where we are in the process. You were just in Ankara visiting with senior Turkish officials. Obviously, the devastation of the earthquake is unimaginable. But we now have this challenge of a timeline to get to the Vilnius summit. So you were very clear, Secretary General, in Ankara, saying both Sweden and Finland are ready, and we want them to enter as soon as possible. But this suggests that, as our Turkish colleagues have suggested, that they are ready to approve Finland to enter. The Finnish parliament is making the preparations to do that. President, I need the clarity. We know we want Finland and Sweden to come together. That's the goal. But if we must, and if Turkey, and of course Hungary, ratifies the accession protocols, only for Finland, would Finland walk through that door by itself? And if so, Secretary General, what are the implications for that scenario?
Okay, our position is crystal clear. With Sweden, we have made an application expressing our will to join NATO. And that will is considered by member states. 28 of them have accepted us. Then to Turkey. It's in their hands. We have got messages, and you have to be quite keen when you hear messages from Turkey. They may change every now and then, but nevertheless, we have heard them saying also that Finland, yes, Finland meets criteria which they have put, which are a bit different from those criteria of NATO. But little by little, they have increased in expressing that they might ratify Finland and just Finland. And even we have heard some voices that if Finland is willing to this kind of separation. And our answer is very clear. We have expressed our will together with Sweden, and we don't react at all. We will not accept or demand any kind of separation. But still, situation is such that our applications are at the table in Ankara, and if Turkey decides that yes, they will answer yes to Finland, but not yet yes to Sweden, well, that would be quite a difficult situation. Our hands are in a way tied. We have applied for membership. Should we now say that no, we cancel our application? No, that we can't simply do. So that's how it looks like. But I want to assure that we have done our part by applying together with Sweden. That's our will to become a member, and it's in Turkish hands to decide whether they want to have us.
Secretary General, this is a dilemma, and I think you've done an excellent job of trying to manage the we want them both in, but we may anticipate a pacing issue here. How do we continue to provide that strong message of solidarity and security, particularly as we get closer to the Vilnius summit?
First of all, NATO has made the decisions we need to make as an alliance already. We made a historic decision at our summit in July to invite Finland and Sweden to become members. And then we all made a decision to agree the accession protocols, and all allies have signed the accession protocols. So the NATO decisions have been made. What now remains is the ratification process of those protocols in all the 30 allied countries. So far, 28 out of 30 have already ratified, and then Turkey and Hungary remains. Of course, my message has been, and was also my message in Ankara earlier this week, that both Finland and Sweden are ready for ratification. They have met the obligations they signed with the trilateral memorandum with Turkey at the NATO summit last July, and therefore I urge all allies to finalize the ratification. But I also said that, of course, what matters is that both become members as soon as possible, not whether one become a member before the other. The most important is to get them both in as soon as possible, and I continue to work hard to ensure that they are members by the Vilnius summit. If I can just add one more thing, and that is that this means that it is a Turkish decision, because they have two protocols, and I urge Turkey to ratify both, but of course if they ratify one, then Finland will be a member of the alliance. Last point is that we have to remember that Sweden and Finland are in a very much better place now than before they applied. It's not as if nothing has happened. They are now invitees, meaning that they're sitting at the NATO table. They participate in NATO meetings. They're more and more integrated in NATO military structures, defense planning, civilian and military activities. NATO has increased its presence in the area. Allies, United States and many other allies have issued assurances, security assurances as part of the accession process. So it's inconceivable that there will be any military threat against Finland or Sweden without NATO reacting. So yes, we need to finalize the process, but we've come a very long way already, both with Finland and Sweden.
Thank you to you both. This is essential and as we understand the next several weeks and months, so thank you. President Sandu, all leaders have tough weeks, but I think you've had a particularly tough week. And I want you to help us understand, of course, hearing news reports that intelligence had picked up a Russian malign operation in Moldova. It, to me, sounded very similar to 2016 in Montenegro, to be honest with you, that type of disruption. If you could share with us what you can, sort of your understanding. You mentioned earlier this week that the situation is still highly destabilizing. And after you share that, how can we learn to better protect our societies from Russian malign influence? Moldova is certainly under enormous pressure right now. So welcome your thoughts on that. And then I turn to how we can strengthen NATO's partnership with Moldova in these difficult days. Please.
Thank you. First, I would like to say that Russia's war against Ukraine has enormous repercussions on every aspect of Moldova's security. It increased, including the military risk for Moldova. In the last few months, we saw 4 missiles crossing illegally our airspace. We have many cases of rocket debris falling on our territory. We see threats coming from different representatives of Russia, the recent one from the Minister of Foreign Affairs, who indicated that Moldova might be the next in line. But as long as Ukraine keeps the Russian army far from our borders, we believe that there is not an imminent military threat to Moldova, and Ukraine keeps us safe. At the same time, Russia is already waging a hybrid war against Moldova, and we have many examples. In the fall, they tried to use the energy crisis, hoping that we will not be able to pay for the very high prices for gas and electricity. When they saw that the government managed to find the money, Gazprom cut gas supply by 60%, hoping that we will not find alternative sources and that the paid protests will overthrow the legally elected government. Now we've learned about a new plan that they might try to bring people from outside the country to organize these violent protests and then to force the authorities into negotiations on snap parliamentary elections. There are many elements of this hybrid war. Of course, the most damaging to our democracy is propaganda and the disinformation, but there are multiple cyber attacks, there are multiple false bomb alerts, and of course, all of this is meant to destabilize the society and to use the difficult economic situation that we face because of Russia's war in Ukraine to bring people into the streets and then to change the government and to bring a pro-Russian government that it could use also against Ukraine.
Thank you, President Sandu. Moldova has had a long-standing partnership with NATO. There's now a NATO liaison office in Chisinau. As we think about building and strengthening our partnership, what are opportunities and ways that NATO can be more impactful and helping Moldova with security sector reform, strengthening and modernizing your defense structures? Give us some ideas as we continue to strengthen European security.
Indeed, we do have a long-standing partnership with NATO, and we are very grateful and we are very committed to our long-term plans. At the same time, we did get the promise for additional support at the Madrid summit. Thank you for that. The priority now is to have projects with immediate impact, and the biggest problem that we have now is the need for air surveillance and air defense. And this is needed for Moldova, but this is also needed for the entire region. So we would like our partners to consider this type of assistance that we urgently need. Because of the internal threats of the hybrid war, we also need to support to develop our strategic intelligence capabilities to deal with the cyber threats. We need support to modernize our border security and control. We need support for special intervention focused capabilities. And I believe we need to work together and to be more efficient in tackling the Russian propaganda. It's extremely difficult for us to tackle this issue alone. I think we need to have common approaches on fighting the disinformation, the pro-war propaganda. I think we need to have common approaches in dealing with the social networks which are not responsive to Moldova's requests when it comes to the pro-war propaganda and to the disinformation. And I do believe that they can take us seriously when we approach them together. But this is a very big issue, and as I said, the propaganda, the disinformation is probably now the most damaging element for our society and for our democracy.
Well, and Moldova is very much a laboratory right now of that propaganda, so the alliance could learn an enormous amount. Prime Minister Frederiksen, as you've now, re-election has happened, you've had an extraordinary year of leadership. I would say Denmark has had its own Zeitenwende when after the war began, the full-scale invasion, Denmark taking the important step of joining the common security and defense policy of the EU, committing $1 billion in defense spending. What more needs to be done? And I think the one concern that I have as we get closer to the NATO summit is we are 1 year away from seeing how NATO members have fulfilled their Wales pledge of meeting 2% in 2024. We know Denmark will be shy of that despite the increase in spending. Help us understand the leadership role that you've taken through this period and how Denmark is increasing its defense spending in this regard.
Can I first of all say that, Maia, you are really a brave European president. I mean, Moldova is a small, it's a poor, and it's a fragile European country. You can be next in line when we're talking about Russia. And you are standing up, you as a person, for democracy, rule of law, and anti-corruption. So you are a brave European leader. And of course, all our awareness is about Ukraine. I totally agree with you, Jens. We have to do more, and we have to do it faster. But at the same time, let us not forget Moldova, Georgia, and other neighboring countries. So when you ask me what are the next thing to do, we have to and we need to spend more on our defense. Of course, that's number one. We have to do as much as we can to support Ukraine with weapons, more donations, and we have to do it faster. I think we have to work more closely together in Europe to keep up producing, because it is extremely important to donate more and to do it faster, but also to be able to defend ourselves. But we also have to build much stronger partnerships. And of course, Moldova is a great example of this, but also when it comes to the Global South. Because we focus on Ukraine, that is extremely important, but at the same time, I mean, what is going on in Africa? What's going on in the Sahel region? If we are not able as European countries to build strong alliances in Asia, of course transatlantic is where it starts and where it begins and where it ends, I totally agree. But if we are not able to build stronger alliances with India, with our partners in Asia, as you said, Jens, in Africa, in other places of the world, we will lose, I think, the global war on values. So we have to do a lot of things at the same time, and we have to, I think, be aware that all the crises we are facing are interfering with each other. So, of course, being able to help Ukraine, and we have to win this war, and they will never be able to win it on their own. We have to win it with them. We have to build a stronger European Union. We have to build stronger partnerships with our neighbors, but we have to be much more active on the global scene at the same time.
That's an extraordinary to-do list. I think one of my favorite quotes from you right after the full-scale invasion was historic times call for historical decisions. And I think that's what you're talking about. This is what we've talked about, historical decisions about Finland joining NATO, historical decisions about joining the Euro-Atlantic community fully, historic decisions about defense spending. Prime Minister, if I can ask you, and take the liberty also of having President Niinistö here, the Kingdom of Denmark plays an extraordinary role geographically because of its position in the North Atlantic. And the Kingdom of Denmark has been very forward-leaning on an Arctic strategy, understanding Russia's Arctic militarization and what that means. I know this is something that the Secretary General often repeats, which we're very grateful for. Of course, Finland's and Sweden joining NATO has now the Arctic Council, at least the Arctic 7, will now all be NATO members. Help us think in your own work with the Greenlanders where you see this as far as building the alliance, how we build greater deterrence in the North, and how do we think about the High North looking forward?
Yeah, thank you for bringing up the High North. I think it will be for the next many years, we will have, we are in the need of having more discussions about the High North. So we were talking about the hybrid situation. Let's not forget about terrorism. The global situation when it comes to terrorism, it should still be on our common table. But my guess is that we will see a more fragile situation in the High North as well. We are seeing more and more Russian activities. And of course, because of climate change, the High North will change in many different aspects. So we need more awareness, and we need to be physically much more in the High North. You are right, the to-do list is quite long, and I have now made it even longer. But that's how it is to be a leader in these years. I mean, so thank you for putting the High North, and of course, Finland and Sweden being NATO members, hopefully soon, will also be very important when it comes to the Arctic region, and it is becoming more and more fragile as well.
Absolutely. President Niinistö, you want to come in?
Yes, I see two elements. First, the security point of view. I fully agree with Mette, what she said. Actually, tradition has been that Arctic Council doesn't take any opinion on security issues. And, well, we see at the same time that the High North, the tensions are growing all the time, and the interest towards that is not only limited to Arctic Council countries. For example, UK is also strongly involved in security issues. But there's also another element that is the environmental one. We have to keep in mind that Russia covers half of the Arctic. And I have often said that if we lose the Arctic because of climate change, we lose the globe. And there we have to be capable of somehow trying at least to cooperate or let Russians understand, put them understand that the question is very crucial. Their houses are collapsing in tundra area where the ice is melting. So they have to realize that it's a common problem too. But back to security issues, that is an increasing issue, and I believe that NATO is taking more and more notice to that too. So it's historic that we have two new NATO members in Arctic Council, in next Arctic Council meeting maybe. Hope so.
Exactly. So I'm going to bring the audience into this important conversation, but I'm going to ask each of you to help with a question that many in the think tank community are wrestling with, and I want a really short answer. I'm going to start with you. I'm going to work down the row. So Secretary General, I'm going to start with you. Do you feel the center of gravity in Europe is now shifted east. And if you believe that, why? Really short. Because we've had a debate that, no, it's not shifting east. Yes, it's shifting east. And then what does it mean? Has it been shifting?
It depends totally what you mean by the question. What has shifted east is NATO's presence. Also, we have much more presence, military presence, exercises in the east, because we have seen over several years a more aggressive Russia. And to respond to that, especially since 2014, we have for the first time in our history deployed NATO troops in the eastern part of the alliance. But of course, many of those troops come from the western part of the alliance. So this demonstrates how NATO is together and how we support each other. And we do that to ensure that Russia cannot continue its aggressive actions against countries in Europe, and to send a very clear message to Moscow that NATO is there to protect and defend NATO territory, every inch of NATO territory.
Prime Minister, shifting east, north and east with Sweden and Finland, do you feel that sense of shift of gravity from the war?
No, I agree with Jens. Of course, we need to be aware of the current situation. So we have supported, all the decisions that has been taking when it comes to the eastern flank, and probably we will have to stay there for a period of time. But I think what is so important about NATO is that NATO is flexible in its way of thinking, in our way of thinking. So of course now the situation is about Ukraine and unfortunately maybe also other neighboring countries. But at the same time, we are able to work with the cyber hybrid situation. And as I said before, I think we need more focus in the south because of the very, very difficult situation, especially in Sahel region. But I think the most important thing is that we are flexible in our way of thinking, and we are able as NATO to move very fast when something occurs in front of us.
President Sandu, do you feel that shift to the east?
I do believe that because of this war, my country is now already part of Europe's security belt. We have been helping with the refugees, with the solidarity lanes, and we are trying to become a provider of security. We need help to become a more serious provider of security for the region.
President Niinistö?
Well, I think it's quite natural that we are now a bit eastwards because of the Ukrainian war. But I would also point out a certain kind of flexibility. Surely we have to be prepared to react wherever there's a problem. And north, yes, Arctic area, Russian border, yes, Black Sea, maybe even Mediterranean. So to be ready to react to whatever, that's the lesson, I guess, we have got during the past year.
So the answer to the think tanks is the center of gravity is flexibility and being where we need to be. All right, we have some great questions coming forward. And let me turn the microphone here, right down the front with Alexei. Please introduce yourself and direct your question to the panelists.
Thank you very much. My name is Alexei Goncharenko, I'm a member of Ukrainian Parliament. And the topic of this panel is building the alliance, right? And I think the building of the alliance will be always incomplete without Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia. So I have two questions from this. First to Secretary General Stoltenberg. This year NATO summit in Vilnius, will there be a strong and clear signal that Ukraine will be a member of NATO, maybe by providing membership action plan or just by statement, but clear and strong that NATO is waiting Ukraine. And the second question is to President Sandu. Maybe it's the time for Moldova to revise the policy of neutrality. I understand that it's not just your decision, but I'm very much interested in what you personally think about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Secretary General.
So NATO's position on membership for Ukraine is unchanged. We agreed back in 2008 that Ukraine will become a member of the alliance, and that is still our position. then of course what matters now is to ensure that Ukraine prevails as a sovereign independent state, because without having Ukraine as a sovereign independent state, there's no way to discuss any kind of relationship between NATO and Ukraine in the future. So the urgent need is to provide military support, as NATO allies and partners are doing every day. In that context, I also welcome the initiative from Prime Minister Sunak to actually have a discussion about the framework we need to ensure an enduring peace after this war ends. Because when the war ends, we need to make sure that history doesn't repeat itself, that Russia doesn't continue to invade Ukraine, because this is a pattern. It started in 2008 with the invasion of Georgia, then in 2014 Crimea and Donbass, and then in last year the full-fledged invasion of Ukraine. And we cannot allow Russia to continue to chip away European security, and we need to break the circle of Russian aggression against the European countries. And therefore we need, when this war ends, to establish some kind of framework that ensures that Russia's aggression doesn't continue.
President Sandu.
Yes, looking at what Russia does to Ukraine today, it's clear that neutrality cannot defend us. Neutrality can defend only when the other countries respect it. But you know that today there is no popular support, enough popular support to change that, and we know that, we understand that, and we acknowledge the situation. We can discuss why is that, and I think the Russian propaganda is to a big extent to be blamed for that. For instance, today, one of the lines of the Russian propaganda is that neutrality means that the country should not strengthen its defense sector, which doesn't make any sense. But unfortunately, there are many people in Moldova who are scared of the war, and they buy this kind of propaganda. So that's why I thought that we need to work together to deal with this, to counter this propaganda. But given the situation, as I said, there is no question now about changing the neutrality, but definitely Moldova should be helped to strengthen its defense sector, and Moldova should be part of the new European security architecture.
Thank you so much. I see back there Tobias Elwood, if we can have a microphone right there, if you can follow my finger. And this will be the last question, because I have one closing question for this panel. Tobias.
Thank you very much indeed. Secretary General, I think you summed up the situation by saying Putin enjoys using force and gets away with it. And if we don't stand up to Putin, then he exploits our weakness. You've heard on the stage the President of Moldova. It almost feels like we're going through this all again after Ukraine. Could I ask what more we could do internationally to support Moldova, because that could very much be next. I was one of the first people, indeed, at this conference last year to say that NATO countries or the Joint Expeditionary Force should be sending forces to Ukraine to prevent Russia's invasion. But we blinked. We were spooked by Russia's rhetoric. So my question is here. You've heard from the Prime Minister of Denmark as well, stating the difficulties that Moldova is now facing. Yes, of course, we need to pressurize and support Ukraine, but Moldova clearly could be next. What more can we do internationally? What more can NATO do? What more can the Joint Expeditionary Force do to support Moldova now before it's too late?
Prime Minister Frederiksen, I want to turn that question to you as you were thinking. What can we do? And then Secretary General, if you have some thoughts on that as well.
Should I start?
Oh.
Okay. I think Jens can answer when it comes to what we can do in the NATO frame, but I would like to add what we can do politically. Because what you said, Maia, is very important, that you have a big minority of your population that actually supports Russia because of fake news and the war Russia is into when it comes to the medias and so on. And we can only, as leaders, we can only support Ukraine and Moldova if we have the support of our populations. because we are democracies. And when we are delivering, like Denmark, our whole artillery to Ukraine, it demands support from our populations. So I think fighting inflation, working with Moldova when it comes to energy. You are not producing any energy on your own. And I think you told me that the prices of gas has been doubled in a very, very poor European country. So, I mean, if you are an ordinary family in Moldova facing that your bills have been doubled, you could maybe feel then it would be better to have Russia to help us or to be a part of our daily life. So, I mean, bringing economic development into our partner countries and never to forget the global south. I really wanted this perspective because, I mean, the food crisis and the energy crisis is working against us when it comes to the situation in Ukraine. So, of course, there's something we can do when it comes to protect Moldova, but at the same time, we need to help to develop Moldova to make sure that the population supports the European perspective, both when it comes to NATO and when it comes to the European Union. I think this is at least as important as the hard measures that I guess Jens will talk about as well.
So first of all, I agree fully with Mette. We need to provide support and different types of support to Moldova as soon as possible. Georgia and Ukraine, two other countries which are vulnerable for Russian aggression, as experienced Russian aggression, they aspire for NATO membership. Moldova has not made a decision to aspire for NATO membership, and of course we totally respect that. But I think if there's any lesson or an additional lesson to be learned from the war in Ukraine, is that we need to support countries which are vulnerable for Russian aggression as fast and as soon as possible now. Because the reality is that the main reason why Ukraine has been able to repel and to push back the Russian forces is, of course, the bravery, the courage of the Ukrainian armed forces, the political leadership, the people of Ukraine. But one important element has also been the fact that NATO allies actually trained and helped Ukraine since 2014. The United Kingdom, the United States, Canada and others provided significant training and capacity building and also equipment from 2014, meaning that the Ukrainian army were much stronger, better equipped, better trained, better led last year than they were in 2014, and that's at least part of the explanation why they were able to withstand the Russian invasion now in a way they were not able to do in 2014. So we are working on our partnership. We agreed at the NATO summit to step up the partnership and support for Ukraine. But I urge NATO allies to do more because it is an urgent need to support those partners who are vulnerable for Russian aggression.
Secretary General, thank you so much. This has been such an important conversation about making sure that Finland and Sweden, full members in NATO, more support for Moldova, 100%. And I think Tobias's words are absolutely clear. The to-do list is massive, but historical times require historical decisions. My last 1-second question to you, Secretary General. American presidents have a tradition of writing a letter to their successor with their words of wisdom. At some point, we're going to choose your successor. What words of wisdom in 30 seconds would you give your successor?
So keep Europe and North America together. And I don't believe in Europe alone. I don't believe in North America alone. I believe in North America and Europe together, and that's NATO.
Amen. Thank you so much. Thank you.